we put the crank in the motor, we'll put the timing gear on it. That way we don't have to beat on the crank on the bearings. And that's it. Now we're going to go ahead and install the main cap bearings. Put some assembly lube on. And we'll set the crank in. Okay, today we're going to show you how to use some Plasti-Gauge when you're building engines. Really, it depends on which engine you're working on. You can check with the manufacturer or owner's manual or anything like that. It will tell you bearing clearances. So check with that, and then you'll find out which Plasti-Gauge you need to start with. But I'm doing a Chevrolet, and Chevrolet I usually want about 2.5 to 3 thousandths clearance. Now, what Plasti-Gauge is, it just shows you a clearance range of your bearing, how much clearance you have between the crankshaft and the bearing. So that's really all you're checking. You don't want too much play in there, so we just take a little piece and sit it over. Take the main cap. I'm torquing the main cap to 65. And now that shows us our clearance that we have, which is right about 3 thousandths. Now what I'm doing is I'm using this clearance range gauge to show me how much clearance I have between the crank and the bearing, and I'm doing that by the thickness of the Plasti-Gauge that's smashed on there, and it's about 3 thousandths. That's about what I want. Okay, now if this smashes way too much, let's say it smashes right here, then I would have to take the crank back out and either turn the crank or look for a little bit different bearing. And if it's a little bit looser than what I like, I could torque it a little more and see if I can smash it down a little bit better. Okay, all you do after your Plasti-Gauge is you wipe it off and you put some assembly lube on there and put your bearing back on and torque it to the same spec, and you should be done with that one, and you can move on to the next. Okay, now you would do the same thing on the rods, but you can't torque the rods tighter than the specification on the rods. So you need to check with your owner's manual or a book for the car and find out what your rod bolt check or torque is, and then you can torque it to that, and that's it. So if you have a problem on your rods, and you're pretty much either looking for bearings or turning the crank again. Put the assembly lube on there. Put the main cap back on. We're going to go to 65. Once you do that, you can do it to the rest of them. Okay, now that we have the crank installed and all torqued, we're going to go ahead and check the end play of the crank. Okay, you just take a little mallet hammer or something like this and smack it like that. You can only check in play on the bearing with the in play built into it, and there's only one bearing on this motor. It's right here, and that's 7/1000 feeler gauge, and it goes in. So we have 7/1000 clearance on this motor of in play. Now typically a small block Chevy is anywhere from 6 to 10/1000 clearance of in play. But again, you'll have to check owner's manual or all that or something like that to find out your specifications. But that's how you check it. You just take the feeler gauge and slide it right between the crank and the bearing, just like that. If you have too much in play, you're going to be looking for a different set of bearings. And if you don't have enough in play, you can take the main cap back off and take the bearings back out and sand the sides of the bearing where the thrust plate is for the in play. And you just sand that until you get the in play that you want. In play is very important in the engine because the crank has to move so much. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and install the timing chain. Time to get our dot up. I'm just trying to line my dot to dot. Take a little screwdriver and push it down a little bit. Take a ratchet and tighten it up. Okay, now we're dot to dot. So, this is something I want to tell you guys. This is not number 1 top dead center. This is number 6 top dead center compression stroke. So you'll be 180 out when you stab your distributor right here at top dead center. So don't never do that. If you want to do it without turning the motor over and checking for compression, put this dot right here, and you'll be top dead center, number 1 compression stroke. Okay, so when you go to all data or owner's manual, stuff like that, and they're telling you to go dot to dot, a lot of people assume that that dot to dot is top dead center compression stroke, which it's not. This dot to dot is your valve timing. It has nothing to do with your distributor and your ignition timing. Don't assume that that's top dead center number 1, because it's not. It's on its companion cylinder, which is number 6. That's the same cylinder that's up at the same time. That's just the cylinder that's firing. Finish putting the motor all the way together and turn it over where you have compression on number 1. That means air coming out of the piston hole. Then you can stab your distributor in, and as soon as you turn the motor over, it'll fire up. That's why so many shows or so many guys you see that build a motor or put a motor together, I've seen it a lot on Spike TV and Jesse James and a lot of those shows, where they'll build a motor and put it all together, put it in the car and mess with it for an hour, and it won't start because it's 180 out, and they finally figure it out. So that's why.